Okay, what this lesson today is talking about is factoring polynomials. And I'm actually splitting this section up into 2 different days because there's a lot of little information and it could be a lot of notes. So we're going to kind of do some factoring today, and then tomorrow we'll finish doing some things with it. Okay. All right. So when factoring polynomials, you have to factor completely. Sometimes you're going to have to factor multiple times to find all the factors. When you're working with many terms, or 4 terms actually, when you're working with 4 terms, it's good to use the grouping method. And remember, we've done grouping before, and we put parentheses around the first 2, parentheses around the second 2, and then we factor out. So a big thing to know is that whenever you're factoring, the first thing you should always do is look for a GCF. Look for anything that goes into all the terms that you could take out. If you look at this first problem on the left, they both have an x, so I can take an x out, and I'm left with x squared minus 49. Well, x squared minus 49 is the difference of squares, so this is going to become x plus 7 and x minus 7, and I bring down my x, and there it is, totally factored. All right, so let's look at the next one. The next one, and what I'd like you to do is try and take out your common factor. And then from there, see what you could do. So you should have taken out a 2x. And so that leaves me with x squared plus 3x plus 2. Now this is a trinomial. Whenever we have a trinomial, we're going to try and use our factors that we learned before. What times what is 2? Adds to give me 3. And so the numbers that multiply to give you 2, but add to give you 3 are 1 and 2. And because it's a positive 3, they're both positive. There you go. So that's the first thing that you do. You always want to try and find a GCF. Now, we've already dealt with some special factors. This x squared minus 49, that is a special factor. But now let's look at the other cases. So right here, x to the 4th, that's actually x squared squared. And 16 is actually 4 squared. And so I do have squares. So this one's going to be an x squared with a 4, and x squared with a 4. And because I have a minus here, the only way I can get a negative 8 is if they're both minuses. Now what I hope you notice now is that these are also squares. This is x plus 2 and x minus 2. And this one also is x plus 2 and x minus 2. And so those are all the factors we have. And so that's the answer. When you look at the problem on the right, 625 is actually 25x to the 4th squared. And 256 is actually 16 squared. So now this is a difference of squares, and there's no middle term. So that means I'm going to have a 25x to the 4th plus 16 and a 25x to the 4th minus 16. Well, the ones that add, you can't factor anything out, but this is a difference of squares here. So this one becomes 5x squared plus 4 and 5x squared minus 4. I can't factor the plus, and I can't factor the minus because 5 is not a square. And so now I'm just going to bring my other first term down, my first factor down, and that's the answer. All right, the last method we have is when we have 4 terms, and this is when I said it's helpful to use the grouping method. Okay, so when you have 4 terms, use the grouping method. And so what happens is you put parentheses around the first 2, parentheses around the last 2. I can take an x squared out of the first one, so I'm left with x plus 5. The second parentheses, it's a leading negative, so I know I have to take a negative out, and negative 4 goes into both of those, so it's x plus 5. Now, if you notice, you have the same parentheses, so that's the first answer. The second answer is the numbers in front, which is x squared minus 4. Now, I hope that you're getting good at recognizing these. We've spent a lot of time on them, and you're going to have them a lot this lesson. This is a difference of squares, x minus 2, x plus 2, and I'm going to bring down the x plus 5. All right, looking at the third one, go ahead and draw your parentheses around the first two and the last two, and see if you can find your common factor from each set of parentheses. Once you think you have that, factor it out and press play to check where you went. So the only thing I could take out of here is an x squared, so I'm left with 2x plus 5. And this one I could take out a negative 4, which also leaves me 2x plus 5. So my numbers in front are x squared minus 4. And then I have a 2x plus 5. Well, we've had an x squared minus 4 a bunch, and that's x plus 2, x minus 2, and then I bring the 2x plus 5. And that's the answer. Okay, so we have 3 problems I would like you to be able to do. I'd like you to start off by copying them down and then try them out. When you think you have them, then press play. I'm going to rewrite them. So for number 1, if you notice, I could take out a 20x in everything, 20x, because that's my smallest exponent, just an x, so I could take that out. 20 divided by 20 is 1, so it's x squared. 220 divided by 20 is 11, so it's 11x. And 600 divided by 20 is 30. So now when you have a trinomial, you have to think, okay, what times what gives me 30, adds to give me 11. Well, that's 6 and 5. And the only way I can get a negative 11 is if they're both negative. And that's the answer. Okay, number 2 is a trinomial. So I have to say what times what is 48. Subtracts to give me 13. Well, 1 and 48. No, that's not 13. 2 and 24. No. 3 and 16. That's it. So now, because I had a y to the 4th, I have to have half of that, so it's y squared with a 3 and y squared with a 16. And the only way I can get a negative 13 is if I have a negative 16, and then that gives me a positive 3. I can't factor a y squared plus 3, so I'm going to go ahead and write that down again. But I can factor this. This is y plus 4 and y minus 4. And there's the answer. Okay, so for number 3, I'm going to kind of add a paper in so we have space. So I'm going to put parentheses around the first 2 and around the last 2. And you have to see what you can go into both of them. And actually, I just recognize something. Before we group them, do you see anything that goes into all 3? Yeah, the x to the 3rd. So I'm going to take out an x to the 3rd, which leaves me 5x squared plus, or 5x to the 3rd, 2x squared minus 5x minus 2. Now I'm going to leave this x to the 3rd here, and I'm going to come back to it. I just don't want to mess with it right now because sometimes people will add more to the factors when you have that out there. But now I'm going to split this up. The number that goes into both of these is x squared, so I'm left with 5x plus 2. And so now you might be able to see why I left this here, because I didn't want another x third making it confusing. Now the number that goes into negative 5 and negative 2, well, that's just a negative 1, which is 5x minus 2. So I have the same term, so it's 5x minus 2. My front numbers are the x squared minus 1. And then the last thing I need to do is I need to bring down the x to the 3rd. And actually, it's not the last thing because I also have to factor this. Plus 1 and minus 1. And I'm going to bring everything else down. So when you're factoring polynomials, the first thing you want to do is look for the GCF. Once you find the GCF, you want to go ahead and if it's a trinomial, you want to factor what times what gives you the last number, adds or subtracts to give you the middle number. And if it's a four term, you're going to split it up into two groups.